Hey, welcome back, guys. We're going to continue with our material relating to circulatory system or cardiovascular system blood, as we're calling it. Alrighty, so let's continue on. Today, we're going to be definitely focusing more on blood typing, which is still in relative information to red blood cells, which is where we left off on our last video. So our last video, the last thing we talked about was this EPO cycle. Making sure we're comfortable with the EPO cycle, very, very important, no doubt about it. But today, like I mentioned, we're going to be getting a little bit more in depth with blood typing. How do we identify what type blood there is? Okay, so in regards to this, some stuff that could be said and shared here. This is first off a review from some material from the last video, so this is just review. Red blood cells are the most numerous cells in the body by far. They circulate for about 4 months after being recycled, so that's on average their lifespan. Millions are produced each second. The hemoglobin inside will help transport gases like oxygen and a little bit of carbon dioxide, but mostly oxygen throughout the body. So this is simply reviewing content from our last video, as we mentioned. Now we get to talk about red blood cells. Now we get to talk about blood types and understand how we identify the different blood types that exist. Okay, so first and foremost, we determine blood types by the presence or absence of antigens. They're also referred to as agglutinogens, but I'm perfectly fine with just the word antigen. Don't have to get too crazy here. And they're found on the surface of the red blood cell. So on top of red blood cells, we have these antigens, and that's what they're found for, right? That's their point. That's their job. To me, they kind of remind me of like a satellite that orbits the Earth. They're just there, sitting there. It's kind of the same thing with antigens. We don't need to get too in depth with the chemical composition of antigens, though, so it's all good. There are three types of antigens that can be found on a red blood cell: A, B, and a special third one called RH, which we'll talk about in just a second. Antibodies, which is something found in the plasma, so not on the red blood cells, but this is found in the plasma, will circulate in your blood and can be something that can help fight anything foreign. So antibodies is something that your body makes as an immune response to anything foreign, which can include foreign red blood cells. So in the instance of a transfusion, so somebody has given you blood, if it's not a proper match, that could be problematic. It could be fatal. So if the wrong blood is in your blood, what can end up occurring is that those red blood cells will clump and break open and burst. That can, like I said earlier, can be fatal and be deadly. Now, regarding the antigens, here we're talking about RH. It's referred to as RH because of the discovery of it. When it was first discovered, the scientists were working on rhesus monkeys, which is just a type of monkey, right? And they were looking at their blood, and they noticed that on the blood cells, there was another antigen found there. Turns out it's not just on monkeys, it's on a lot of animals, including us. We have this RH factor. Now, if you have RH on your blood, that's just simply referred to as positive. So you may have heard of, for instance, A positive blood. That means you have the A antigen and you have RH. If you don't have RH on your blood, you're referred to as negative, which you may have also heard of A negative blood. Negative means you do not have the RH factor. Sounds good. Now, this last bullet here, this is more so referencing information associated to how the anti-RH antibody is created. It has to be after you've been exposed to RH positive blood, which normally that doesn't actually happen. But this could be a problem for pregnancy. And we'll explain about that in just a little bit later. Okay, moving on from here. All right, let's try to learn more about blood type. Let's attempt to learn more about them. So there are 4 major groups of blood types that we see here: A, B, AB, and O. Let's just first talk about the antigens so we can at least understand what the antigens are telling us. In type A, you just simply see these antigens sitting on the cell, and in this case, they're colored and indicated by these red circles. Is that what antigen A actually looks like? Not really. But it's a good way for us as the learning person or as the viewer and the student to understand what it is. Okay, sounds good. Antigen A sits on these red blood cells, making this a type A blood. Got it. Type B, on the other hand, is a circumstance where you once again have red blood cells, but sitting on the red blood cells, you have these blue triangles. What are the blue triangles telling us? It's a different antigen. That's all you need to know. It's just a different protein. So, simply put, you have type A and type B. Okay, got it. Now, what happens if you have a type A person mating with a type B person? This is where things get interesting. If you remember biology, there was a lot of information in bio, no doubt about it, but a particular chapter of biology should have been about genetics. And specifically in relationship to genetics, you have something called phenotype and genotype. Phenotype is your physical traits. That can be eye color, hair color, your height. It can also be what blood type you are. So let's say, phenotypically speaking, somebody is type A. Okay, remember, phenotype is one thing. Genotype, on the other hand, is your genetic information. Genotype can be a little bit different. But let's say for this example that somebody's genotype is going to be AA. Why do we see two letters here? It has to do with the fact that our cells are diploid. You get one pair of alleles, which is part of your DNA, from your mom. You get another pair of alleles from your dad, right? Two mixtures of DNA together to create you. So let's say somebody's AA. If they are mating with someone who is type B blood, so let's say they're phenotypically B, but genotypically they're also BB, right? If they're mating together, this should look familiar for people who know their biology, you should be able to get 100% chance of creating AB blood. And that is what we see here. When you match the A and the B together, you now create a new blood cell that has both A and B on it. Okay, sounds good. After some time had passed, because for a long time in human existence, the only blood types that existed were A, B, and AB. After some time had passed, though, type O was formed, which is a mutation. It was a mutation in which people were born with nothing on their blood cells, a naked cell. Now, what's interesting is that mutation wasn't one of those mutations that just kind of existed for a little while and then went away. It's a mutation that's existed in our species for a very long time now. I'm actually type O myself. So it's funny. I like to think of it like, oh, I'm a mutant just because of blood, right? Now, why is this type O a big deal? What's the matter about having no antigens? Well, the reason why it's a big deal is because of what we see with antibodies. Let's look back at type A. If you are someone who is type A because you have this antigen A on your blood, that means in your plasma, you have the anti-B antibody, or just more easily referred to as the B antibody. Why the B antibody? Because if someone were to give you anything with B, which is the opposite of A, your body's going to react to it negatively and it's going to fight it and it could harm you. Same thing with type B. If someone is type B and they have anti-A antibodies and someone gives them a type A blood, your body's going to fight it. That should be straightforward enough, right? The antibodies are always going to be the opposite of the antigen. That's what we expect. Now, what about someone who's type AB? With someone who's type AB, they have both antigens. So because they have both antigens, they have no antibodies. That actually plays a major role as to how type AB blood works. And finally, type O, the unique one, the mutants, right? Type O, they're this naked cell, so that actually plays a really important role on how they are donated to other people. But when it comes down to receiving type O blood, you have to be very careful. If you're someone who is type O and you need blood, why you have to be so careful is because people who are type O have both anti-A and anti-B antibodies. Meaning, unless you're another type O person, you cannot give to a type O. That is a big restriction. And that can be problematic, for sure. Now, what happens in the case where you are, let's say, type A, and somebody gives you type B blood? Well, this is what ends up happening. So, again, let's say that this example here in this lilac color is all happening in someone with type A blood. How do I know that this is type B? Because on the last slide, literally the little triangles indicated type B. So for someone who's type B, if they're donated, or for someone who's type A, if they just received a donation of blood that is type B, well, that type B blood is going to interact with your anti-B antibodies. That's going to cause something called agglutination. We need to know that term for sure. Agglutination is another name for clumping. Clumping is basically when a bunch of cells group up together and form more of a solid structure that alerts the immune system, and thus it can lead up to hemolysis, which is cell death. The cells literally blow up. Obviously, this is a problem. The good news is you don't typically see this happening too often because in medical circumstances and in hospitals and medical settings, they have a lot of checks and balances to make sure that the person who's receiving a blood transfusion is receiving the right blood transfusion. So you don't get this scenario. That's the big thing that you're trying to avoid. Okay, so that's all the information on blood typing that I have just in my notes. There's more than that, and I'm going to explain it through these extra tabs that I have open here. I'm going to eventually add to Canvas, which is where all our information is, all of this information in one neat, organized place to help you guys out, because I do think blood typing is important. We need to know about it, because not only for the test, but just so you understand more about it. So let's talk more about blood typing. So we're going to reference more blood typing information here. I've used this website a number of times. It is just the American Red Cross website. Obviously, their information is very valid and useful. But I think this does a great job of summarizing a lot of content in relationship to blood typing that we need to know. So let's read what we see. There are 4 major blood groups. We just mentioned that earlier, right? A, B, AB, and O. So 4 types. Of those 4, though, you have to keep in mind, and we can look at this back here. So if I scroll back, and we're going to scroll back to here. Remember how on the blood cells there's that extra antigen called RH? You have to keep that in mind when you're thinking about how many blood types there are in humans. So because of the RH factor, which can either be present or negative, or absent, you multiply that 4 times the 2 possibilities of RH, either present or negative, meaning you now have 8 types of blood. So let's go ahead and write that down too. I'm going to actually use this other whiteboard here. So just to keep things organized for us, we're going to go ahead and say that there are 8 types of blood in humans. 8 types of blood in humans. Why are we saying humans? Because obviously this is human anatomy and physiology, but other animals have different blood types. They don't all have, it's not universal. It's not every single animal has 8 blood types. That's why. Now, what do we observe here? These are the 8. Remember, there are 4 core groups, A, B, O, and AB. But for each one of those 4, you have a positive and negative version. Okay, sounds good. Here we can see, I love this website because it does a great job of using like interactive infographics. So for instance, if we are talking about group A or type A blood, where this is stuff that we just talked about in our slides, type A blood is going to have the A antigen on the cell. That's what we expect to see. Meaning in your plasma, you're going to have antibody to fight B, or the anti-B antibody as we call it. What about if you're type B blood? It's just the reverse. You have the B antigen on your cells and you have the anti-A antibody. All right. What about type AB? If you're type AB, because you have both antigens, your plasma is clear. Your plasma is going to have nothing. This is really important to how AB blood works, and we're going to expand upon that in this video. And then finally, type O. Remember, O is this negative, is this neutral cell, this naked, clean cell. It has nothing on it. That is super important to how O works when you're donating to people. But people who are type O have the anti-A and anti-B antibodies, which can be really restrictive for them to receive blood. Okay, a little bit more about blood typing and transfusions. Every 2 seconds, someone in the U.S. needs a blood transfusion. So obviously, if you can, if you're healthy, donate. Donating twice a year, in my opinion, I think is sufficient. You don't have to overdo it, right? But there's some stuff about RH that we need to understand. So let's talk about that. So I'm going to use this whiteboard once again. In regards to RH factor, I try to summarize it and try to keep it as clean and easy as possible for us. If someone is RH positive, meaning you have the RH factor and you need blood and you're receiving blood from someone else, you can receive blood from other RH positive people, or you can receive blood from RH negatives. So if you're Rh positive, you can of course interact with other Rh positive people. But if someone donates to you blood that has no Rh factor, your blood is fine with that. Your body says, oh, well, no big deal. We're fine with that. No problem. So we're good. But what if you are someone who's Rh negative? If you're someone who's Rh negative, you can only donate blood to other Rh negatives. Or you can only receive blood, sorry. You can only receive blood from other Rh negatives. So this equal sign that I'm showing here is like, this is indicating that you're receiving blood from other people. So if you're Rh blood, you can receive blood from other Rh positives or Rh negatives. If you're Rh negative, you can only receive from other Rh negatives. That's it. If somebody who is Rh positive gives you blood and you are Rh negative, your body's going to react to it saying, what is this new antigen? I've never seen this before. And your body's going to fight it. And it could be deadly. So that's obviously something that could be very problematic. Okay. There's some stuff in bold here that we're going to talk about too. But first, let me just walk us through this little graphic. So let's say you're type O, type O, right? If you're donating blood, who can that blood go to? Well, interestingly enough, type O can go to other O's, obviously. O can also go to A, B, and AB. How does that happen? Go back to our slides. If you're type O, remember how it's a naked cell? There's nothing on it. Well, type O blood can interact with any of these blood cells because there's nothing on it. It's a clean slate. Not to mention, look at the antibodies. There's no such thing as an anti-O antibody because theoretically an anti-O antibody would just be attacking red blood cells, period. And that's not good, right? That's not good for your body. So there is no such thing as an anti-O. So an O is just a clean blood cell. Anyone can use that. And that's what we see here. If you donate O, it's going to go to any other people. There are some restrictions to that though, but because of how O works, we have a unique name for it. So as far as that's concerned, we refer to this as the universal. Oh, it looks more like a V now that I notice. Let me rewrite that. The universal donor. And who is the universal donor? O negative. Why negative? Oh, sorry. Why negative? Because first of all, remember O can be given to all people. That's what we just saw previously. You can give it to other O's, you can give it to A's, you can give it to B's, you can give it to AB's. But why negative in this case? I'm sorry. Why negative? If you look back at the RH rule that I was just mentioning, if someone is RH positive, they can receive blood from other positives and from negatives. So being an O negative individual makes you the universal donor. You can give blood to anyone on Earth. There are no restrictions. For that reason, I tend to call O negative the martyr's blood because you can give as much as you can to anyone who needs it. But when you need blood, that's where problems come into play. O-type blood, you can only receive blood from other O's because they're naked cells, right? So you can only receive blood from other O's. And remember, if you're someone who's negative, Rh negative, you can only interact with other negatives. So for people who are O negative, they can literally only get blood from other O negative people. Big restriction, no doubt about it. What about type A? Type A, as you can tell, will be able to give blood to other A's, as expected. But type A can also give to other ABs. Why does that work? Well, if you look at this picture here, type A is the circles in red, while type AB still has those circles in red. It doesn't matter that AB has also the triangles. Your body's not going to respond to that. Your body's just going to see, hey, this new blood that you're receiving, it has the stuff that we can recognize. We're good. No problem. So because the A's match, you're fine. Type A can donate to AB. Got it. What about type B? Type B can, of course, donate to B's, but it can also donate to AB as well because the B's are now matching. We're fine. No problem. The only blood type that's going to be restrictive as far as who you can donate to, AB. ABs can only donate to other ABs because the A's have to match and the B's have to match. But here's something interesting you may have noticed. If you're type O, right, and you're donating blood, you can, of course, donate to everyone. If you're type A, You can, of course, you can donate to A's, obviously, and ABs. If you're type B, you can donate to Bs and ABs. And then, of course, ABs can donate to ABs. So there's a term for that.
Did you get that email from Paul Armstrong?
There's a term for that. We refer to this blood type as the universal recipient. And specifically, what type, it is AB, but specifically, we have a very specific answer for this. It is going to be AB positive. So AB positive is going to be the very specific type of blood type that is considered universal recipient. In this case, it's basically you won the genetic lottery. You are able to receive blood from everyone on Earth. There are no restrictions to who you can get blood from as long as the person's healthy, obviously, right? So you can receive A, you can receive B, you can receive AB, you can also receive O, because remember, O can give to a lot of people. And because you have Rh factor, remember, someone who's Rh positive can receive from other positives and other negatives. So there's no one that restricts who you can get blood from, which is pretty impressive for human evolution, for sure. But as you're going to see in our video, not that many people are considered AB positive, just statistically speaking. So let's move on. This is information talking about the universal blood donor. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, if you're O negative, it would be a massive thing to be donating two or possibly 3 times a year, because unless you're unhealthy, if you're unhealthy, obviously you may not be able to donate. But if you can, you should be, because with O negative cases, the only blood that O negatives can receive is from other O negatives. That's super restrictive. And as you're going to tell, we're about to show it in this webpage, there's not that many O negative people anyway. So you rely heavy on the help of other people, for sure. So let's look at the blood types. Interestingly enough, the blood types that we experience, there are different percentages of each blood type occurring based off of ethnic groups. We see this globally. We also see this in the United States, but let's focus on the US for now. Remember earlier how I mentioned how type O blood is a mutation? That still stands. Type O blood is still considered a mutation. But even though it's a mutation, most people on Earth and most people in the United States have type O, which is pretty interesting. More specifically, O positive. O positive, 37% Caucasian, 47% African American, 39% Asian, 53% Latin American. So a lot of people are O positive, myself included. What about O negative, the universal donor? Not that many. This is once again why I was mentioning that if you are O negative, it would be important to donate blood, because that blood is basically like gold. What about A positive? A positive is a blood type that's actually more prevalent amongst Caucasians, and more specifically of European descent. People of European descent, like British, Scottish, Irish, French, German, Italian, not really Spanish, because the Spain obviously is more origin for Latin countries. They basically conquered a lot of these places. But these other European countries have a higher chance of being A, more specifically A positive. But you still see A positive in other ethnicities, as you can tell. What about A negative? Numbers drop again. Interesting. There's a common theme that you're seeing here. B positive, on the other hand, is going to be a blood type that's more prevalent amongst Asians. So it's something that originated closer to Asian countries. So that's why you see more Asians in general. B negative, rare blood type. This is actually a really rare blood type. AB positive, the universal recipient, the lottery winner. Someone who's AB positive, they can get blood from anyone on Earth, right? Even though this is a really good blood type to have, not a lot of people are AB positive. It just doesn't happen that often. So not as common to expect this. And then the rarest, absolute rarest blood type, AB negative. Why is AB negative so rare? Well, it's so rare because, and this is what we're about to talk about on our whiteboard that I'm going to pull up. Positive and negative, as far as Rh factor, is considered dominant and recessive. So what I mean by that is that if you have a parent who has Rh factor, like your dad, for instance, and then your mom does not have Rh factor, so she is Rh negative, the positive factor, Rh positive, will always move down to the son or daughter, to the progeny. The only way you could be born with Rh negative is if both parents don't have it. So that's why these numbers are so low. Now you might be thinking, if someone is AB negative, does that mean they're in a lot of trouble regarding blood? Not really, because the good news is this. As an AB negative person, you can get blood from O negatives, B negatives, A negatives, and other AB negatives. So you do have a pool of people to grab blood, to take blood from if you need it, just not nearly the same level of pool of people, as we're calling it, as AB positive, obviously. AB positive is everyone on Earth, right? Now, the last thing to discuss on this page here has to do with how we identify what blood type you are. And simply put, it's stuff that I was already showing you on the whiteboard that I had. You just do Punnett squares. You just understand genetics, because blood type is a genetic situation. Now, here's something interesting that can occur. What if you have an A-type parent and another A-type parent? Well, the child can be born A, obviously, or O. How does that happen? Let's take a look. So I'm going to pull this up again. Okay, so let's clear this real quick. Okay. Regarding how a child could be born A or O if both parents are type A, it has to do with phenotype versus genotype, which we talked about already, and it has to do with dominant and recessive traits. It turns out that both A and B are considered dominant. So when a child is born with type AB blood, for instance, that's a co-dominant situation where literally both traits are equally dominant. Type O, on the other hand, is going to be considered a recessive trait. Recessive traits are traits that don't normally express themselves, so they're not normally part of your phenotype unless that's the literal only genes you have. So let me show you what I mean in the form of a Punnett square. If you have a mom that is a type A blood, but her genotype is, let's say, AO. Remember, A is dominant, so the A is what's going to be showing. When she gets her blood drawn, she's going to show up as type A blood. And she mates with a father who, let's say, is also type A blood. And that father is also AO. This is someone who's going to be phenotypically type A. If you do your Punnett square and they have a child, you'll notice what ends up happening. There's a 25% chance they have a type A child who has AA. Two dominant traits, or two dominant genes. Okay. There's another 25% chance they have another child with who is type A, but it's going to be AO. That AO is going to be phenotypically A, but it's not it's a hybrid, right? It's not going to be a purely homogeneous. It's what we call a heterozygous. This is pure biology, by the way. Once again, if you have another child, right, you have another 25% chance of another AO being formed. So now really it's more like a 50% chance of AO. But there's a 25% chance of a child being born with OO. Two recessive traits. So that is how you can have two A parents giving birth to a type O child. It doesn't happen that often because, like I said here, in the Punnett square, 1 in 4, right? So it's not as often to occur, but that is possible. Now, if a child is born OO, they're only passing O's down. That's the only way. That is the only way. So, for instance, if we go back to our little diagram here, if you have a mom that's O and a dad that's O, the child is guaranteed O. Guaranteed going to be O. But what if you have a parent that's A and a parent that's B? It can be literally any blood type. It just depends on the genotype. So it depends on the genotype. That is a lot of stuff that is very imperative. Okay, last thing I want to share with you guys in this particular video, because this one's definitely on the longer side, is this chart. So here we see the blood cell compatibility. Basically what this shows us is on this column here, or on this row, these are the donors. So these are people donating blood. And then on this column, we have the recipients, people receiving blood. Remember, O negative is the universal donor. So if you are someone who's O negative, you can give blood to everyone. But if you're O negative, who can you receive blood from? Just other O negatives. You cannot receive blood from anyone else. Because even if you try to get blood from an O positive, because the O's match, right? But because someone who's O positive has Rh factor, it does not work with someone who's negative. But what about A positive? Let's just look at another example. If you're A positive, right, you can donate to other A positives, obviously, and you can donate to AB positives because they have the A, and the positives match up too. But if you're receiving blood, if you're a recipient, where does that blood go? As far as AB positive is concerned, sorry, my hair is just kind of doing weird things. As far as A positive is concerned, you can receive blood from, of course, other A positives. That makes sense, right? We see that. But the A positive people, because of RH and the RH rule, which we have back here, I just got to show it to you guys one more time. Oh, wrong one. Which we have right here. Remember, if you're Rh positive, you can receive from other positives or negative. So because of the way that Rh rule works, someone who's A positive can get from the A positive group, but can also receive from an A negative. They can receive from an A negative. The A's match, and even though this person doesn't have Rh factor, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. A positive people can also receive O positive blood, because remember, O is a naked cell. It can be given to a lot of people, and the positives match up as well. And then, of course, A positive can receive from O negative, because O negative is the universal donor, right? And that's what we end up seeing here, right? This is this chart that gives us every possible matchup between donating and receiving blood. You don't need to memorize all of these things necessarily, but if on the test I were to tell you, I'm just going to give you a random example. Jane is in the hospital with B positive blood. What blood can be given to her for her to survive? You just have to look at the recipient, right? She's B positive. Who can she receive blood from? She can, of course, receive blood from another B positive. She can also receive blood from a B negative because the B's match, and even though the Rh factor is different, a positive can receive from other positives and negative. She can also receive blood from O positive and, of course, O negative because it's the universal donor. That's stuff that you have to be able to think about without looking at a chart like this, which can be difficult, but that's why practice makes perfect. So we'll work more towards that as far as rehearsing and making sure we're comfortable with, like, hey, this blood type, who can you receive from? Or who could you give to? There's other ways to phrase that question, right? And the last thing I wanted to share with you guys, just real quick, it's just some interesting information, and I'll put this in that info that I'm going to share to Canvas with you guys. It's on Discovery. This was posted back in 2019. But it was a mutation that was discovered in blood types called Rh null. Basically, it's a situation that affects the Rh factor that we've been talking about. They call this, the nickname for this is the golden blood. It's not because it turns your blood gold or anything like that. The reason why they're calling it the golden blood is for what we see right here. It's such a rare blood type that only 43 people on Earth have been reported to have it. That's incredible. So that is such a small percentage of people because there are billions of people on Earth. So to only have 43 people having this condition is pretty insane. And for something like that to happen, obviously it can directly affect how you live your life. Because if you get in a major accident and now you need blood, there's not a real good chance that the other 42 people live in the same country as you. So that's a really unique circumstance. Again, I'll share this link with you guys when we end up talking more about the information that I'll share to Canvas in regards to blood typing. All right. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Definitely more on the longer side, but it's all about blood typing. We got to make sure we're comfortable with how this stuff works. All right. Other than that, I'll see you guys on the next one. Have a great one.